Today's workshop and discussion is a practical guide to advertising on streaming services and devices. And I am looking at the agenda here. And so I'm going to introduce the panelists here in a second as well. But the agenda today is we'll go through some basics. We'll go through the reach in terms of how you approach buying and advertising and utilizing streaming services. We'll talk a little bit about how, and this really is a differentiating factor, right, Scott? This is how targeting and matching for the types of people and audiences that you use this for varies differently from traditional, what we say traditional TV advertising. And then one of the things that really drives many of the questions is reporting. How granular, how detailed, what's available. And so I know you've got some examples there that we can show. And then I've got Q&A on the agenda, but as I mentioned, please put questions or comments directly into the chat, because I want to make sure that if the question is relevant to the topic that we're on, that we get right to it and not have to wait, right? And so the today's discussion is being recorded, and so when we're done, I'm going to put this recording as well as some reports that Scott's going to send me that will illustrate some of the things that we'll talk about today into the Facebook group, which is the Practical Pitch. It's a private group, but the cost is very reasonable. It's free to get in. All you've got to do is visit it and say, let me in and answer a couple of questions. The community at the Practical Pitch has really been designed around supporting and answering and solving regular marketing problems that we see every day. And so the recording here, along with some documents, I'll put up there. If you're not a member of the Practical Pitch, just shoot over to Facebook when we're done here and just sign up if you are interested in participating in that. Like I said, documents and whatnot will be added to it. So let me introduce Scott and Eric. You've got your video on, so you've got your finger right on the video. So if you want to turn that off or whatnot, that'd be good. But Scott, my name is Kerry Weston, for the group that may not know. I am with Sutherland Weston here in Bangor, Maine, and we are a marketing and PR firm. The reason I'm excited about today, and the reason I'm excited to bring Scott Bagguley in from ExactDrive, is one of the questions that we get from a number of businesses, big and small, around streaming and advertising circles around what do we do, what is it, what makes it different, and all the wonderful things. So Scott, from you guys are based in Wisconsin, but today I think you find yourselves in Denver, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
You guys are out traveling. Well, welcome. I appreciate you spending some time with us and lending your experience and expertise. I know it's going to be valuable.
Yeah, I could do it.
Good. So let's get through to a couple trends just to set the stage. So talk to this a little bit, Scott. We got 84 million people. If they have a device or a screen in their house, it certainly is growing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and especially even just with this last year through the pandemic, I mean, connected TV and as itself with the younger generations, it's already been seeing an upward trend. But with COVID and the pandemic and people having to stay at home, it just started to boom even more. So, a lot of industries took a big hit. Well, connected TV advertising actually grew tremendously over this last year. And it's only going to continue to do so. I mean, people have really found they don't need cable. They like being able to watch shows and movies at their fingertips whenever they want. So it's just going to continue to grow.
Yep. And as we were talking beforehand, talk a little louder if you would. There might be something coming through from the Denver air. That oxygen might be keeping your voice from coming through, but you're coming through a little light for some of the folks too that are chiming in. So,
okay.
And I know that there are some habits that consumers and perhaps everyone here kind of formed in the last year over COVID that perhaps were not as regular, but became more prevalent. And now that we've been involved in it, now that we've been doing it, it's not likely to go away. It certainly won't continue. Perhaps some of these things won't continue at the same pace, but it's certainly not going to go away. And I think streaming is one of those things, right?
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. To your point, the data that you shared beforehand, there was a 75% increase in the use of streaming devices from the year prior, which is, as you had told me, right? Regular TV is remaining flat, minimal growth of flat, but the streaming device increase is pretty substantial, is it not?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And this was interesting to me as we talk about applications and services and devices. One of the counterpoints that people have when they're asking, is this something we should get into, is the thought process that many people watching apps, streaming TV, connected TV, OTT, all these terms are opting not to see ads, right? But that's just not true, is it?
No, I mean, if they opt not to see ads, then they're paying monthly fees for certain programs, and then it becomes, well, does it make sense for us to actually be shifting over the connected TV? Because initially you kind of do it to save money, but if you're paying for Hulu and YouTube TV and Amazon Prime and all these things, well, the bills kind of add up. So ultimately, you have to make a choice of what's important to you. But if you're going to want to watch stuff for free, you're going to see ads. And as this industry grows, these ads are going to continue to be more relevant to you, which is something that we're excited about.
And the numbers you were sharing with me in one of the reports was about 4 out of 5 of the connected TV viewers are watching ads in the programming. About 80% of the people that are looking at these apps actually have ad-supported content, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Pretty significant number, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is actually, again, an increase of about 47, almost 50% increase in over the last year, right? This is the continuation of the theme that you shared earlier, which was we've been seeing some growth. COVID may have accelerated it, but certainly maybe just it grew faster on something that was growing anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
You saw these trends prior to COVID. This just accelerated kind of the stuff that was
Yeah,
happening anyway.
yeah, just amplified
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so let me turn it over to you here. So let's go through the basics. What I want to do is make sure that we've got folks here that have varying degrees of understanding, familiarity, and perhaps even experience with streaming devices and advertising. We've got some folks that maybe have been doing it for a while. Maybe we've got some people here that actually participate in selling it. And then we may even have some businesses here that have been thinking about it, but much like social media, it becomes one of those beasts that they just can't get a head around and jump in yet. So let's bring everybody up. There's no gospel. This is just a perspective, and as you understand it in your day-to-day basis. But let's get everybody up to what we're defining and what these terms mean as we use these moving forward. Do that for me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so CTV stands for connected TV and OTT stands for over the top. Ultimately, connected TV falls under the umbrella of over the top. We like to separate it out just because some people like to advertise strictly on the TV devices. Over the top, the difference is, so CTV is any type of TV screen that can be streamed in digital video, whether it's through a built-in smart TV platform, dedicated streaming device, or gaming console. OTT is TV content accessed through the internet without going through cable or satellite TV. So it can be your phone, tablet, gaming system, any app format. So that's the difference. And typically OTT, not on TV, is a little bit cheaper than connected than going on TV. So there's value between targeting different devices.
Okay. And so give me a brief, and we'll go through some of these details as we get to devices and targeting, but give me your generic presentation when someone says, why would I advertise on CTV or OTT?
For me, when comparing it to traditional TV, it kind of takes the guessing game out of it. Traditional TV quality content, you can target key demographics, your reach of audience across various devices is much greater. And it's just a very seamless creative setup and execution with it. So I think anyone that's already doing traditional TV, making the shift over to connected TV just makes absolute sense in terms of being able to find your precise audience and who you're trying to reach.
And here at the shop, we don't really look at it as one versus the other. It kind of becomes a complement to fill in the gaps, right? I've had I've had a client that is an auto dealership for, boy, more than 20 years, and we've certainly gone through some different methods of advertising through those 2 decades. It started as solely newspaper, put the whole lot in the newspaper every weekend, and then it morphed into email and then the online component. Well, one of the interesting things that they do at the service shop is um, we do an audit. So every car that comes in, the intake clipboard has on it radio stations, and the service tech is trained to go through the radio stations to see what their top 5 programmed are on the radio station. We do an audit, and that becomes kind of our baseline for how do we communicate to the audience as a whole, because it is a regional audience. They just, it's about on average 45 to 60 miles around the dealership is their audience. And what we saw starting about 10 years ago, plus or minus, was a growth in non-terrestrial radio. So we had your typical radio station coming from your local community, your country station, rock station, whatnot. But then Sirius and satellite started to roll in. And about 10 or 8 to 10 years ago, that started to be about 15, 18% of the audience. It's north of 40% now as they come in, which means as we're advertising on radio, terrestrial radio, as we define it in the community, there's an opportunity that we're missing 30, 40, maybe even more percent of the market. So it doesn't mean we shift everything to satellite and other purposes. It just means there's a gap there that we're looking to fill, right? So can you explain, one, the difference between the ads of CTV and TV, and then why the combination kind of makes sense?
Yeah, so traditional TV, it's pretty simple. Ads are purchased to a designated ad slot on a specific channel, whereas CTV ads are more of a time-based from a specific viewer watching a program. So the advantage of it is really there's no guessing where the audience is. You built the target audience based on demographics and behavioral signals, but the look and feel is virtually the same, and they can complement each other in a good way. Like you said, filling the gap is a good way to look at it.
Okay. And I want you to talk to me as we're going through here, because I know I'm pretty simple. So as we get into the next levels, this is a very high level thing, but as we get into the devices and targeting and reporting, I want you to remember that I'm basically at an 8th grade level as we go through here. And if let's dive deeper as we go, but you're very good at keeping it very basic. So the industry is full of acronyms and multi-syllabic words. And I just want to make sure that we clarify that going through. So let's take a look. Talk to me a little bit about what we call the reach. So let's talk about devices and channels and apps. And then I want you to come back home to the local business, because when we talk about these things, these sound big, right? These sound like I'm going to be on ESPN or Discovery, and I've got to buy California if I want to buy Bangor or if I want to buy Denver. So bring it home to the local business when you're done. But let's talk about the devices, the channels, and the apps that you typically see.
Okay, yeah. So for devices, that's things like Roku stick, Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire Stick. Then you have PlayStation, Xbox, for the younger kids, or even.
So people are watching. So I only see them playing games on the Xbox and PlayStations, but people are actually watching television through, or they're watching these programs through some of these devices.
Yeah, through those gaming systems, you can download Netflix or Amazon Prime app, and then you can watch it through the system that way too.
Okay.
And then there's also Samsung Smart TV and Apple TV as well. That's another way you can access it.
So these are the physical devices, and so basically the streaming services is agnostic to a device. It could be any number of things that help me get the signal to my gaming, my television, my phone, my laptop, whatever it might be. Right? These are ways in which I'm getting it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk to me about channels and apps.
Yeah, so channels, those are things like A&E, AMC, the Outdoor Channel, HGTV, ESPN. All of these channels you can target specifically, but then you can also target them categorically. So there's 2 different approaches to it, and different ways that you can buy the media. So if you just want to target a sports category, then we're looking at targeting, ESPN, maybe the Outdoor Sports Channel or the Fishing Channel. So those are specific channels. The actual apps that we're talking about would be who we're buying the channels through. So like Pluto TV, Crackle, Fubo TV, AT&T TV. Those are apps that we're actually accessing the channels through.
So talk to me about, those are all video based, but we can also get into audio, right? We can also get into audio as well as video. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so for audio, Spotify, Pandora, those types of things, it works very similar in terms of how you're finding your audience. There's also online radio, which that tends to be a little bit cheaper, but yeah, Spotify and Pandora, I mean, that's also been continuing to grow. But then again, there's people can pay for subscriptions to avoid
Yep.
ads, but you can also make ads non-skippable. There's other various things you can do, and we have ways to find, and target people that are only watching the free programs.
Okay. And I think it's important to say that what you do is not proprietary. You don't have secret sauce. Like, you don't have access to channels that no one else has access to. We're just talking about the ways in which we can get in some of these things. There might be things that you do very differently, and I understand that, right? But in terms of access, is it a myth to think that if you want to be on this app or this channel, you have to go through one person specifically, or is it pretty much, if you know what you're doing, it's an open enterprise?
Yeah, it's an open enterprise. I mean, there's a lot of strategy and data-driven analytics that come to it. So it's important to find a good team that you can trust. But ultimately, like Spotify, for example, you can go to direct to Spotify, and you can target ads. Same with Hulu, you can go direct to Hulu. But some of these bigger companies, they do that obviously to bring in more advertising dollars to themselves. But the smaller players, they open it up to multiple platforms that you can buy the media through.
Okay.
Standard Invest, Google, a lot of different platforms that you can use. Trade Desk is another big one.
So we have had, to your point, this is why I asked this question. To your point, I have had a client try to buy Hulu specifically. Like, they had a goal of getting on Hulu, and I tried to assist. There is a contact our advertising rep at Hulu, right? And then you go through this process and literally have never heard back. Like, it's trying to get a hold of someone to talk about a small budget is kind of difficult, right? And so I guess I'm asking this question is, there are different ways of getting onto the same apps, or different ways of getting to the same audience. You don't have to go directly to the source, correct? There are, would you consider yourself to be, well, let me ask you, what would you consider ExactDrive to be? Is it a broker model? What type of model kind of works in this?
Yeah, broker model is a good way to look at it. We're a middleman. We have good relationships with a lot of these companies, so we hear back quickly because we buy a lot of media through them across numerous different advertisers. Hulu specifically tends to be a lot more strict with what they're allowing on their platform service, so their creative auditing is very strict, and that's just to protect themselves from making sure that they're not, serving anything they don't want to. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's with going through someone that just we specialize in media buying, so we have very strong partnerships, which allows us to just get things done much smoother.
Okay. And there are a number of folks doing this as well. I know there's different layers, but I just want to make sure that we know that there isn't one specific, that's a tough word today, specific path that you need to get onto some. Now, there are some platforms that you can't get onto, right? So you mentioned in your devices, you were talking about Apple TV or Amazon Stick, but I can't advertise for an Amazon program specifically, or get into an Apple TV program specifically. So there is a difference between the device and what I can actually buy into on that device, right?
Correct. Like Amazon Prime, a lot of the actual Prime videos itself don't have ads, but through Amazon Prime, you can download, Fubo TV and things like that through those specific devices.
Yeah. So it's not open access to everything. It's just there's a combination of what's open and what's not, right? Okay. So talk to me about whether I'm a credit union or an investment firm or an engineering firm, and I have a specific geographical area, be it part of Maine, for instance. I'm in Bangor, so perhaps I service Maine, or perhaps I have a couple, I have a Florida or Virginia, that kind of thing. If I have a specific area for what I would call local biz, does this work for them as well?
Yeah, and that's to me, that's the most exciting part about it. It allows the small to mid-sized businesses to compete with the larger brands. So I mean, we can target by country, state, city, DMA, zip code, and even latitude and longitude. We also do a lot of geofencing around a specific area. So there's many different ways that we can geo-target the audience specifically, but ultimately this is real-time media buying. So it tends to be a bidding war, and depending on what's going around in the world can dictate what type of race we're seeing. The example I usually use is, for ESPN specifically, during the Super Bowl, it's going to be a lot more expensive than, in the summertime during when the sports there's no major sport. So there's strategy beyond that and working around holidays and those types of things too.
You just lost all baseball fans, Scott. You just lost all cred with a Red Sox fan here. But all right, so let's move on to some of the targeting and matching, and this is where we start to get a little granular. So remember, 8th grade comment here, and then dig a little deeper. And again, back to the panelists. Anytime you've got a question, throw it into the chat. I want to make sure that we're keeping it relevant and meaningful to you. But let's talk about 3 specific ways in which you've talked to me in the work that we've done with targeting and matching. Let's start with addressable. What does it mean at a high level, and get me into some of the details?
Yeah, so addressable targeting is just targeting specific, a physical address of someone. So we essentially take
like my home address.
Yep, exactly. So we essentially take a Excel sheet or a Google sheet list of addresses that you want to target. So where we find this to be very popular, political season is extremely popular, or if you want to target a higher or lower income neighborhood. So that'd be another very common approach that people use. There is additional costs that come with it because we're getting extremely targeted, but it's certainly a way to really make sure you're getting in front of the people that you want to.
Okay, so let's stay here for a second. So if I have a spreadsheet of 1,000 customers, or perhaps I have 1,000 people that aren't my customers, if I have their street address, what happens when you say I can target via addresses? Take me through that. What's literally happening at that point?
Yeah, so essentially what you do is you would send us the file. We put it in what's called a data segment. So it's just a segment that we would attach to the campaign and the geo that we're targeting. And basically the platform, the systems use the algorithms to basically just do their thing and target those specific home addresses. And IP targeting can be involved in that too.
Okay, so let's get back to my 8th grade level, because you got into some terms there that are over my head. So let's say my address, 50 Broadway, right? Let's talk about that. Does that mean that if someone's watching a connected TV in the living room and my 12-year-old is using PlayStation and my 9-year-old is on the iPhone, does that mean that they're looking that I'm physically at that address, so therefore those devices are in play?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. And then how can you just broadly sweep that address? Like no matter what they're doing, I can get in front of them, or do I have to have a combination of I'm buying certain characteristics and whatnot? Like what happens at the address level?
Yeah, I mean, there can be a mix of with the IP targeting I mentioned before. So, but essentially,
whatever if you're watching something within this perimeter, I'm going to put an ad in front of you. That how that works?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. All right. I just learned something. So that's very cool.
And we can get into cross-device targeting, which cross-device targeting, like you mentioned, your iPhone, your TV, and all those types of things, that comes into play too. Where if we're just targeting specific like connected TV, but we're also overlaying cross-device targeting, which is targeting multiple different devices, that would then allow us to target those other devices as well with banner ads or just basic video ads or those types of things too.
So behavior, I see behavioral on the slide. So addressable and behaviorable. So can I create videos that only show at my house?
Yes.
So I could talk to my kids through the streaming devices if I create videos. And
essentially you could, yeah.
When I see behavioral, I want to change their behavior. So maybe I'll create some ads and literally just have it run in my house and say, get off this thing, you're going to throw it through. All right, so let's talk about behavioral targeting. What does that mean?
Yeah, so behavioral targeting is targeting not so much a network or a channel, it's targeting user behaviors. So, essentially what it does is it takes the link data from web pages that they're visiting, searches that they're conducting online, contextual categories and content that they're consuming. What we do is we buy, companies are buying and selling data all the time, but we get access to data that we can buy. It's called third-party data. And we essentially just overlay that on the campaign. And we're just targeting specific user behaviors, and we're not focusing on a specific channel, which, it can be, because sometimes depending on the campaign, it might be tough to find where your audience is going to be and what channels they're watching. So then you kind of go with this behavioral approach. So it doesn't matter what they're watching. You know that this is the audience that you're looking for.
Okay. So when we get into search campaigns and we start building audiences, there's kind of an intent audience where this is very big brother, right? Where Google is really looking at your behaviors and it's mapping against an algorithm. So if you're a credit union, for instance, it's almost that Tom Cruise movie. I always forget. I want to use the example, but I forget where they were predicting the crimes, right, to get there ahead of time. And someone will throw it into the chat because I've been here before. Minority Report. Thank you for that. So we're talking about Minority Report stuff where if I'm a credit union, I can literally buy the behavior of someone that looks like they might be shopping for a car as I get into search, right? That's an intent audience and they're in the market for something. Can we do that on streaming? And we start talking about behaviorable, and is this something that we can do?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So if someone is looking for a car, or if someone's looking for an engineering firm, or if someone's looking for a financial services firm, there's a model for that, right? And all this stuff costs more, right? The more specific you get, the more it's going to cost. But these things are real.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So let's go. We've got addressable, so I can talk to my own house. Behaviorable, I can create videos and talk to my kids while they're on some app and get them off, right? Tell them to go brush their teeth. Maybe I'll do that this week. Let's talk about demographic. What are we talking about there?
Yeah, so demographic is just age, gender, household income. We've asked access to household census data. So these types of things are all things usually we're overlaying it on the campaign. So if we're looking at higher income or lower income, male versus female, those types of things we can target specifically.
Okay. And I see someone raise their hand, and I have no idea what that means because now I'm exposing my Zoom. So if you want to throw something in the chat or throw in a Q&A, I'm certainly happy to do that because I think someone's trying to get a question through. So I'm going to stall while they're doing that too. So as we look at some of the social targeting and some of the Google targeting, there have been some restrictions on what we can focus on from some of the credit rules, right, and some of the consumer protections that have come in. So what changes are we seeing in demographics specifically that may be affecting what people can and cannot do?
Yeah, so right now it is still kind of up in the air. It's kind of open for someone to take the lead and others to follow. I think we actually just had a big conversation about this yesterday. Right now, when you go to websites, they have the little thing pop up on the bottom, like you are going to be cookie. Do you want to accept? So I think the power is going to always be in the consumer's hands, where they're going to basically decide whether or not they want to be tracked and followed. But ultimately, it comes down to, do you want the internet and things you're accessing to be free or not? Because ads make that be free. So ultimately, I think, with consumer data and privacy, it's certainly a big thing. I think it's going to take a little time for them to figure it out, but there's no real answer at the moment. But it's definitely something that we're on top of to just really make sure that we're at the forefront of it.
Okay. The ability for the question that came in, and I've asked for more clarification because I'm not sure if I understand what the word means, but I'm going to say this to you and you tell me. Someone's asked, can you specifically target your Experian demographic?
Yeah. Experian is a data provider that we have access to. So there's a lot of different data providers. We have access to over like 200 different types of data providers that we can use, and Experian is one of those that we can specifically leverage.
See, they didn't teach me that in 8th grade, so I wasn't able to chime in on that one. So I'm glad you did. Very good. And Scott, I saw your hand go up, but another Scott put their hand up, and I can't see you there. So go ahead and put it in chat, and I'll go through. Talk to me about some of the experiences you've had then putting addressable, behavioral, demographic together. Can you give me some real world experiences on how this has worked for other clients and some of the things that's been done?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of universities. So this would be one big example. So overlaying all three of these happens very often. So we're targeting specific neighborhoods outside or local to the university. But then we're also overlaying behavioral data of high school students looking to get into colleges. And then with the demographic, we're being very specific to the 16 to $19 range. And then when we get into continuing education, then we're more at that 25 to 35 demographic range. So universities is one example. We do a little bit with car dealerships is another big one. With behavioral data there, it's obviously intent to purchase a vehicle. So we're really looking at how they're searching things online. Depending on what vehicle the car dealership is trying to push, demographics then would come into play if we're going after a higher income or a lower income family. Addressable isn't used too much for that, but it certainly can be if there's specific areas that you want to be targeting. But usually then we just get into just geo targeting a specific city or zip code.
What about time of day and whatnot? Can you get into some of the filters? So I don't want to be talking to people at 2 o'clock in the morning because I know my audience is probably devaluing at that point. So what kind of restraints and kind of controls do you have as you put this stuff together?
Yeah, so it's called day parting. So typically when we start a campaign, we keep it very broad. So we're targeting at all times of day because sometimes it surprises you on where and when people are watching things. But then we're able to pull a by hour report. So if we're seeing, wow, a lot of people are watching things from 9 to 11 p.m., let's just target that specific time frame. Well, then we can apply a day parting and just target ads from 9 to 11 p.m. And really, for budget purposes, you're very more strategic and using your budget in a smarter way.
Okay. So talk to me about, can you be running, I'm going to go back to the credit union example because there's some seasonality to what a credit union does, and it's all based on consumer behavior, right? So can I be running a home equity campaign to one audience, an auto promotion to another, and maybe just a generic branding or new member recruitment to another? And how does that play in terms of who sees what? I mean, how specific can you get doing multiple things at the same time?
Yeah, so it'd just be a behind the scenes strategy of how we would set up the campaign. So we call it line items. I know it's a little more high level term, but essentially what we would do is we would have different creative sets for different audience or profile that we're looking at. And we'd also could apply different geos or behavioral segments to those different areas that we're trying to target.
Okay. So let's talk about budgets, because I know we got into age range and all this kind of stuff, and we're going to move to reporting here in a minute, and that's the fascinating part. So I do have a question. I'm going to ask you this budget question, and then I'm going to come to Scott's question too. When you are talking about the wider the audience, the lower the cost, right? And as we start to get into more specific, if I want to create a, yes, it is time to go brush your teeth, Spencer, it's 8:30 and I don't want to fight with you anymore, ad for my home address to get in front of my 10-year-old, because I know exactly where he's going to be at that particular time. What are we talking about when we start talking about volume and pricing and specific and whatnot? Give me some ranges, and how do you measure it, and what are some of the things that we want to know about as we start to think about campaigns specifically?
Yeah, so in terms of budget, the beauty of it is there is no minimum for most networks and channels that you're trying to target. So generally speaking, we recommend no less than $1,000 for a budget on a minimum sense, just to get enough data.
For what period of time? Is that a weekend? Is that a month?
Over a month. Over a month.
Okay.
So there's a big range there.
So talk to me about, so as you do that now, if I am a service provider that has a geographical footprint of 2 counties in my state versus I'm an airplane mechanic firm and I have the US, right? There's got to be a burn rate factor to what you're saying here, right? So there's got to be all kinds of asterisks.
Yep. So when we're talking about CPMs, which is cost per 1,000 impressions, or how many times the ad's being served,
okay,
there's a very wide range for connected TV. So I would say it's anywhere from that $25, $30 cost per 1,000 to upwards to $100 to $150 CPM. So like you mentioned, if we're targeting the whole US, that's going to bring the cost down. If we're getting more granular, that usually is going to be a little bit more expensive to ensure that we're actually hitting those people. but there's other additional costs and savings that, can be brought into play too.
I'm going to have to do the ROI measurement of trying to get my son to brush his teeth. But so I've got a privacy question here from Scott. So he asks, my son graduated from college and is applying for jobs at banks and credit unions. Do employers use that same marketing behavioral data if cookies are allowed across devices during the employment screening?
That's a good question. A lot of those companies would be, they could be targeting specific job title websites to be found, but they are absolutely collecting their first party data. So when he's coming and applying to jobs, they're collecting his information as long as he's clicking accept, and then they are selling that information to real-time media buyers like us.
And so his name is Scott Baxter. So do they know it's Scott Baxter, or they just know it's somebody that looks like this bunch of characteristics?
They do not know it's specifically him. It's just somebody that fits that profile.
Okay. That is basically as you are retargeting a little bit. So we have the ability to get to the person for the first time. And again, I'm going to reference what some people may be more familiar with, which is kind of the display and search targeting that can happen like with Bing and Google. I can use one set of ads to bring you in and then place that cookie or track you. And then I can create a separate campaign to follow you, a little bit of retargeting. So can you do that in some of these connected and streaming things? Can I have two separate angles to the retargeting and the attraction?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing where cross device would kind of come in. So we would proactively be targeting people through connected TV, but then we would do a cross device retargeting aspect to it, where then we're retargeting them with banner ads on their mobile device, laptop, desktop, those sorts of things. So
okay, so let's go there, because you just introduced the banner ads. So we've been talking about audio and video at this point, but is there another layer here? There's graphical components that can go into some of this stuff?
Yeah, we call it companion banners. So, a companion banner, not in the sense of there's no banner ad basically overlaying on top of TV content that you're watching, but it's just another way to hit the audience at a different part of the internet.
Okay.
So if I'm watching TV and I'm seeing, a 15, 30-second commercial, well, oftentimes, I know my wife does it often, while we're watching TV, she's also scrolling on her phone or she's on her laptop searching the web. She could be served a banner ad or a basic video ad of the same brand that we just saw on TV.
Yeah, it's very Big Brother. It's very Big Brother these days. All right, so let me throw, because I've got somebody on right now that is a director of an association, of a downtown business association. So there's a collective of businesses. Okay, so if they wanted to, and I'm going to bring back your demographic, behavioral, and addressable to kind of put it in a real world scenario. So let's say there's a downtown business association and there's a number of businesses in a geographical area. Okay, so let's say they pool their money, right? And so they're going to create a shop downtown kind of campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
From a retargeting point of view, if somebody walks by or in to one of these specific audiences, could there be a specific ad set coming from so we're using a generic kind of let's shop downtown, but then I walk either in or by a specific audience, probably into or nearby. Can I then reserve that specific business ad to the person that was kind of captured in that initial awareness campaign?
Yeah, so in that scenario, we use a company called Factual for that. It's mobile geo-targeting. So we're able to actually retroactively target up to 6 months of anyone that's visited a specific area or storefront. Basically what they're doing is they're collecting mobile device IDs, and then we're able to use those IDs and target people up to 6 months prior or in real time.
Okay. So Experian then would be a data collecting devices that works across the different platforms. So you can tap into some of these first levels, if you will, data collectors, and then use that to your advantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Is there anything else before we get to reporting that you think should be worth talked about or mentioned here when we're talking about targeting and matching? All right, so we're going to move to, look at that. I actually had screens for you and I didn't use them, right? So And look at that, user interest, purchase behaviors, all kinds of stuff, age, gender. You hit it, man. It's like you knew what was there. Good for you. All right, let's get to, let's get to, can you tell we've practiced this, haven't we? Let's get to reporting options, because this is something that baffles a lot of folks. And so there are a lot of, let's say, brokers or salespeople to the streaming services. I know that there are television stations, there are media stations, radio stations. There's a number of people that sell other people's products as they've built trust, right? They built trust and confidence as a sales rep, so to speak, in one of these avenues. And it's just natural for someone that has relationships with businesses and clients to add to that portfolio. And so as we have businesses that have been buying streaming and connected and OTT from, let's say, a television or a newspaper or some other media station, sometimes the reporting that comes back is thin, right? And so, or it's just not fully understood. And this is really where I want to go. So it's no fault of the person doing it. It's just the convenience factor sometimes of working with the same person for multiple types of purchases is too good to pass up when you're a business owner. Mm-hmm. So that's the background for this first question, which was impressions to me tends to be the most used number when someone is both buying, selling, or reporting. So talk to me about what impressions really is, and are all impressions the same?
Yeah, so impressions is just any time the ad appears on the TV or device, that's going to be counted as an impression, whether it's for 1 second or 30 seconds. Probably the most important metric that we look at is 100% completed impression views. So,
and what does that mean? Again, eighth grade.
Yep. So 100% completed view means they watch the entire commercial or ad for if it's a 15-second or a 30-second ad, and you can make these things non-skippable too. So when we're pulling in an impression report, you're comparing impression versus 100% completed impression. And typically we're above, especially with connected TV, we're above like 95% completed view. Most are non-skippable. Most people don't exit out of the program that they're already watching. So it's a good approach. But then you can get a lot more granular with it. So you can look at 100% completed view from a device model, from what network or what channel, what time of day. You can get specific geo. We can get down to zip code. We can even compare. All right, these zip codes are getting a lot better completed views than these, so they can target your budget towards those specific areas.
Okay, all right. And is impressions a good measure of the value of a campaign in and of itself? Are impressions where you would value?
So I would say from a connected TV and OTT standpoint, it's a very brand awareness type model, right? It's not a call to action necessarily, because people can't click to a web page and then create an actual action. So I think depending on the brand, product, and whatnot, an impression it is important, because we're just trying to get in front of people and have them see the ad itself.
So in traditional television, we would call that reach and frequency, like how many people you're reaching and how often they're seeing, right? That's the total gross rate. So as we get in there, impressions basically is mass audience view, right? Just basically how many, right? But I also know that if I have let's go back to our credit union example, and I have a very specific audience. If I have 50,000 impressions that show at 11 o'clock at night on the black and white oldies channel, that might not be the audience I'm after. So even though I get a bunch of impressions, it may not be right to my liking or have any value. So where do you configure that? How do you figure that out? And how do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so usually when we set up a campaign, obviously the initial setup is extremely important. But then we usually give it a few days to kind of let the system do its thing. These systems are getting smarter every day. We collect that data, and then we're pulling reports as granular as we can. So we're pulling a device report, we're pulling a network report, we're pulling a geo report, creative report, hourly report, and we're looking at all these different types of metrics and comparing to find where can we shift budget to better utilize the impressions and where we're trying to get in front of.
Okay, so And that reports, and those are one of the reports. You'll give me a sample. I think we said we'd put that into the practical pitch when we're done. There's a sample. I like graphs, right? I'm a very simple guy. So give me data, I get confused. You give me some graphs and I start to see context and some details. So the ability of clicking through and seeing devices and channels and apps and the types of people, the demographic information, and maybe even the shows they were watching, or the channel, or the apps they were watching, right? And when they were doing it, that's all available in a reporting format if you get into advertising on streaming stuff.
Yep, and it'll break it down. Each of those specific examples can break it down from the impression to 100% completed view as well.
Okay, so if you do have somebody that is actively running a campaign and they're just getting a gross impressions kind of report, in as simple language as possible, what would you encourage them to ask for? Like, what would be the question on the person that they're working with? What should they ask for in order to get some of this information?
Yeah, so in a situation like that, it's that doesn't tell a good enough story, right? So you want
impressions in general.
Just impressions in general, because you want to know where they are. If you're just getting an impression report, well, that doesn't really tell me anything. Like you mentioned before with the credit union example, those impressions could be anywhere, right? So you really want to make sure, I think the most important thing is where were these impressions being served? So what networks and channels? And then from there, look at what time of day were people watching and what devices were they on. So then that way we can target a specific time of day on these specific devices and shift more budget to these specific channels because this is what's working best.
Okay. So I'm looking as well, and one thing that popped out here is we have someone from a chamber here. So much like we talked about with the Downtown Association, we've got chambers that have a variety of interests and a variety of business types and a variety of perhaps sizes and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. What would you recommend as you're putting together campaigns for organizations, right? What would you recommend you focus on as you try to be valuable to the membership as a whole, if this is something you wanted to do? Is there a model that you've seen that would allow for collaboration of multiple businesses to kind of do this together and then have different settings that's relevant to them inside a campaign, or should they all kind of do it on their own?
It'd really be dependent on if they share a similar audience that they're looking for. So I guess if they combine money, power of money, then they can, get cheaper rates that way to bring more value and more impressions to each brand. But, it's just something that we would need to really jump on a phone call and talk strategy and just see what would make the most sense in terms of finding the audience we're looking for.
Okay, great. And so I've got another question here that comes down to tracking responses. So there's one thing where you have a television or a screen that you do not interact with, right? And you just brought that up in your reporting. You brought that up in terms of branding impressions. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be impacted by the message, right? Because I'm on my couch, I'm looking at it, and I can't actually act. For the other side of this, where you do have a device that you are used to touching and you interact with, the question that Scott provided here is, what is the mechanism for tracking response rates to the ad, and how does that tie back to the target list provided? So not on CTV, but on some other interactive device, what is the mechanism for tracking that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so for video, for those specific devices, that would just be more of a basic video campaign where they actually can click and come back to a website. A few different ways you can track it. We usually place a conversion pixel, and that can be placed on any point of the page. And whatever point you're trying to, we call it a thank you page. So if you're trying to do an email submit, information or a product sale, the thank you page. We put a conversion pixel there, and once they land on that specific page, the conversion pixel will fire, and we're able to track, when that happened, specific time of day it happened, and go from there.
And you can actually link that back then. And again, there's no gospel here. There's nothing that says that Scott Bagguley made this purchase because Scott Bagguley looked at this because Scott Bagguley had this device, right? But you can get pretty specific in terms of geographical information, what they were doing, what they did afterwards, and then track them in analytics. So the ROI then of actual buys at some level, there's going to be some ambiguity and some grayness because none of this is exact and none of this is gospel. But there are some tools, I think I'm hearing you say, that can allow me to use analytics, my website, and a streaming campaign to kind of tie some of these trends together and see if there's a cause effect to some of the stuff that I'm doing.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. And Scott, I see your second question too, and I think that was answered in your first one. So just track in if there's another level of detail that you're after, but I think what you were talking about with the engagement cycle was just answered. So talk to me about publisher. We haven't mentioned the word publisher in our conversation yet, as we talk about our reporting options. So we talked about video completions. We talked about the day and the hour, and you can set all that, right? So you can kind of set, I only want this stuff to be seen between, say, 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., something like that. Mm-hmm. We've talked about device type and make and model, so I can tell. Some of the reporting you got to me, I was amazed at how popular the Roku is. I do not have a Roku in my house. I am an Apple TV guy, so I got a bunch of them. I've never seen a Roku, and I've never touched a Roku, but I know they're popular. But in some of the reports you send me, Roku is very prominent in the home. So there are things that probably you should be aware of, that even if you're not familiar with them or you don't interact with them, they are happening in spades in other places, right? And so I'll just stay there for a second. So how popular do you see certain devices in different areas, or is it pretty consistent across the board?
I would say Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, and Google Chromecast are definitely the three most popular. But that's why we don't really try to think of campaigns of how we feel about it, right? Because it surprises us all the time of what's popular or what channel or what network is popular.
And to that point, because Shelly just weighed in that she's got 6 Rokus in her house. So first of all, that's a lot of TV going on there, Shelly. So get outside and swing the golf club. It's beautiful out. Second, do we have to pick the device, or is it agnostic to a device as you put these campaigns together?
Yeah, no, as I mentioned before, usually when we start a campaign, we keep it as broad as possible, because it'll surprise you on what may be more popular in that specific geo area that we're getting at. So we keep it broad, we pull reports, and then we narrow the device down from there.
Okay, so let me say that. Let me go back to Shelly. So she's got 6 Rokus in her house. She's a baseball fan. She's a golfing enthusiast. If I start to notice in your data that the majority of people that see this stuff on Roku are interested in golf and are sports fans, is first of all, one, is that something I can start to see? Can I start to tie these interests and demographic trends to a device? And 2, can I start to pay a little bit more or get more specific with that data that I'm getting back, so can I start serving certain ads to that kind of combination?
Yeah, so yeah, once we see that data and analyze it, then I mean, like I mentioned before, it's real-time media buying, right? So the more expensive we bid, well, that's just the more opportunity we're going to have to get access to these specific, and time of day is a big thing too. So from 5 to 7 p.m. where news is popular, a lot of bigger brands are targeting during that time frame. But if we're targeting a higher rate, well, now we're gonna have a better chance to win those placements.
And can you make assumptions, or can you buy on assumptions? So I have somebody here, Dan Cashman, that is a big Golden Girls fan, right? He talks about watching old Cheers and old Golden Girls, right? And Mad About You, I think, came up the other day. So he's a fan of the older sitcom. Can you start to buy impressions in front of people that have that kind of let's say interests in shows and the type of characteristics of the shows they watch?
Yeah, so I would say there's 2 ways we could approach that. One would be behaviorally, so we would be targeting more of like old timer shows. The other way would be, if you know when those shows are typically on, then we can target that channel at that time of day.
But to your point earlier, don't think of this as when shows are actually on. We're really thinking about reach and behaviorals and the data that you really can't get from buying traditional ads. Okay, good. Yeah. All right, good. So we've had good questions along the way. Thank you. And there's plenty of room for questions. But I think what I want to ask you is, having done this many, 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 many times, what are some of the things that come up often, frequently asked questions with clients that are getting to this for the first time or are looking to expand their audience? Like, what are some of the things that we haven't talked about? Some of the questions that come up frequently that you answer all the time that we haven't touched upon, and perhaps even some of the reporting things that we haven't talked about. So I'll leave it open-ended here. There's no slide for what I'm asking you here, so take it off the cuff.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I would say is really budget and pricing, right? Because connected TV, it seems very big and very powerful, like traditional TV, is very expensive, right? And they're always surprised when we tell them, listen, there's no minimum budget. CPMs are a wide range, and it's a lot cheaper than traditional TV. So it really opens the door for local businesses to compete with these bigger brands, and it's only going to continue to be even greater as more people are bringing and watching connected TV, and we're having access to more devices to hit. So it's exciting.
How we referenced baseball before, and there's a couple schools of thought with baseball, right? As you can adjust, you get your pregame. I always love in basketball as well. There's always the systems coach, and then there's the react on the fly coach, right? And so you've got the person that's got your system, and come hell or high water, this is what we're going to do. And then you've got the philosophy of, these are our plans, we're going to do as best we can, and then at halftime, and if it's not working, we're going to scrap everything and respond to what we see. How nimble are the buying content? So Shelley asked, or the buying approaches. Shelley asked, if we buy under one assumption model,
Mm-hmm.
and some show starts to grow in popularity, starts trending on an app or starts to grow, how long is that process? How nimble and responsive can we be to kind of jump on that show of the moment or that trend?
Instantly. That's the beauty of it, is nothing is locked in. So, and that comes from a publisher standpoint, time of day, network, channel, device, geo, creative. Everything can be changed in real time on the spot.
And can you build in metrics that says, this is AI, right? But can you build in metrics that says, if something is rising to the level of trending or popular or growing at a certain rate, we automatically kind of go to it?
Yeah, we have if-then approach models that we can do.
Okay, so this is kind of getting scary, right? You're talking about automatic artificial intelligence taking over the world, and all I see is those dog robots coming out of Boston Robotics, right, opening doors and feeding themselves. Someone asked about A/B testing. So I know that to Scott Baxter's earlier point, we can start to see behaviors, and we can on a linear test with analytics and web, we can do A/B. If this shows up 50% of the time, and if this page kind of offer, what's the difference? Is there a higher interactivity rate, sales rate? Talk to me about A/B testing and comparing and streaming and devices as you put these campaigns together.
Yeah, so typically for A/B testing, it's usually on the creative level. So things like testing a 15-second ad versus a 30-second ad. You can do 60-second ads, but it's very limited on.
Who's got time for that?
Yeah,
Get me
right.
back to the show, right?
Ad placements for that. So we highly recommend a 15 to 30-second ad. But then there's also different messaging, different types of ads. So if you have a few different 15-second ads or a couple different 30-second ads, we can pull reports and look at performance of each and then push more budget to the ones that are performing best.
So let's tack on to an earlier question that Scott asked. If we're going to A/B test a 15 or a 30, or even let's say we have 15s and we're going to A/B test a different message, can we then take a look at which one is through analytics? And let's say we have a shopping cart or whatnot. Can we start to take a look at which ad is driving to the site analytics on that way? Or are you just talking about interactivity on the streaming report side?
Both. I mean, I guess if we're talking about bringing someone back to a website, then that would be just specifically to a video or banner ad, not necessarily connected TV, because there is no clickable action there. But A/B testing across any form of media buying can certainly happen and can happen in real time.
Okay. So what is the most, again, on the spot, no slide for this, what is the most creative or imaginative ask that you guys have had to participate in your memory in terms of people trying to do something with some of the streaming devices and whatnot? How creative are you getting, and what stands out as a memory?
I mean, we've done some stuff for the U.S. Army, so we got to get a little creative with the recruitment process and where we're trying to recruit. So we helped with a little bit of strategy with that. We're not the ones that actually create the ads. We stick to what we know best, and that's the actual media buying and strategy. But
So let's walk down there. Let's talk about the U.S. Army, because we see them all the time. So what kind of stuff are you doing, or did you do with the U.S. Army? Like, talk to me about the creative approach, the strategic approach there.
Yeah, most common campaigns were recruitment, but then outside of that was finding homes for veterans after they were done. Finding jobs was another big one that we did. So, and we have a full integrated marketing strategy campaign that we do. So we're doing banner ads, we're doing video, we're doing connected TV, and they handle a lot of the traditional stuff on their end. But having a fully integrated marketing strategy, as long as you have the budget, is usually the best approach, because then you can determine what tactics are also performing best from a media buying standpoint. But yeah, that was a very fun.
So from a recruitment point of view, obviously different types of people. We just talked about demographic and interest targeting. So you've got your traditional recruitment and your non-traditional, just like schools, right? You've got your traditional coming out of high school, and you've got your non-traditional, maybe a little older and a different life situation. When you put together recruitment campaigns, are you putting different, are you seeing different creative and different messages being applied to those different demographic kind of folks?
Yeah, different. It's very geo-targeted heavy and age demographic, right? So we're usually targeting between that 18 to 21 or 24 range, from a demographic standpoint. Creative messaging. Usually we don't do too much. It's usually just two different types of messaging that we're trying to compare.
Yeah. But you can get into some if-then scenarios that kind of gets pretty niche if you want to. So we can't have any discussions about advertising and social media and streaming these days without saying the word political. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing political ads? Shelley asked this question. So are they taking over? Are they buying the streaming side as much as they're buying traditional broadcasting too? Are you seeing that happening?
Yeah, there's been a huge shift from traditional to connected TV, and definitely during high political season, that's where connected TV does get a little bit more expensive. So you have to be very strategic on where you want to target your ads, just because it's sometimes it gets tough to compete with the bigger brands, that are really driving a big price.
Okay. So we've kind of wrapped up the discussion points that we wanted to talk about. I've got a couple more follow-ups here, but what I want to share with the folks that are with us is please continue to send your questions. I appreciate that very much. This did get recorded, or is being recorded. And I am going to post it, the replay, along with a couple documents that Scott's going to send for reporting over on the private Facebook group, which is easy to get into, the practical pitch. So I've got a couple questions coming in now, so good. My first question to you, though, before I get to these, and I'll let some more come in, so thank you. I want to make this, again, as interactive and meaningful as possible. For the first-time beginner that has been advertising on television and radio and wants to go here, what are some of the advice that you would give them? What's some of the guidance that where do they start? Because just like social media, there's 100 different places to go, and everyone gets paralyzed with the amount of work and planning that goes into it. So what would you share to that first-time business owner that's kind of looking to dip their toe in the water? Where do they focus? What do they kind of prioritize, and how do they get started?
Yeah, so to me, I think retargeting is the best place to start. It's the most cost effective, and it's you're already serving ads that people have shown interest in your business, right? So anyone that's come to your site and shown interest, you're basically retargeting them with ads. So I think that's the best place to start. You really feel like you're getting value out of your money then, and then from there, as you're getting more people to your website, then you can start thinking about more proactive approaches. And that's where we're talking about behavioral targeting specific domains, just specific categories in general, and then we can get into audio, video, connected TV, and it's really dependent on your budget model, and your marketing budget, and what you're comfortable with spending from a proactive standpoint.
So one of the philosophies we have here at the firm is any campaign or work we do should be persuasive and prepared, right? So persuasive is the stuff and the effort, the tactics that you use to get noticed. And then the prepared is, what do you do once you're noticed? So how prepared are you to be responsive and whatnot? It's basically, persuasive is the first time engagement, and the prepared is, can I get their information so I can stay in front of them without having to pay more money and be relevant and valuable. So the retargeting, for those that don't know, when you say start with retargeting, I think what you're saying is there are people that are already looking at you anyway. There are people that are already coming to your website, and there are people that are already coming to your shop. So those are probably the fundamental group to begin with. And so when you say retargeting, you're saying that if you were to put together a campaign, depending on the budget, that allows you to just stay in front of or get in front of them again, or kind of repeat messaging, or just remind them that they're the people that already have seen you at some level or participated is that what you're saying when you say that the basics of where you would start is there?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so that's very good. One of the questions that came in is, given how dynamic this can be, what mechanism is used to facilitate those media buys? So that's probably where you talk about your software approach and some of the stuff you have in terms.
So it's called a demand side platform, or also a DSP, and there's many out there. As you mentioned before, anyone can really do this as long as you have the knowledge to do so. Some platforms have a minimum budget, like 100,000 monthly spend. Others are free to use. Usually the ones that are free to use, you can't get as granular and strategic with approaches in terms of buying. So these systems essentially have algorithms built in, and things happen in milliseconds. But it's important to have, we have a media buying team that's watching the system, essentially pulling reports, analyzing the data, just to make sure that we're trying to have as most successful campaign as we really can.
So a DSP would be the process. That's the broker. That's the middleman. Some of the DSPs are automated, and some of them are talking to a human, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are talking to someone that is selling or asking for your streaming business, are they always the DSP, or are there multiple layers kind of in the way? Are there multiple brokers in the way sometimes, or is it always kind of a one stop or a one hop away from the source?
Yeah, so lots of times agencies try to act like it's their own proprietary information, or systems. So you have to just be a little bit careful with being many parties removed. So some agencies use an agency who use an agency that then use the DSP.
And what does that translate into? What's the one thing that translates into?
Your budget gets cut in half multiple times.
Because everyone's taking a piece. Yeah, right. Okay. So, that's important to say. Yeah.
So it's important to ask questions. Really know what systems they're using. Even seeing proof of the reports and data.
So let's jump into pricing, because one of the questions that came in is, let's talk about pricing. And again, we're going to compare this to traditional advertising, right? So Katie writes, I'm used to buying broadcast or cable and recognize the price per spot relates to the number of eyes or the reach that they see during that time spot. How do you evaluate the price of a spot on streaming service? How do you evaluate the value of what you're buying versus something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's different from a traditional TV standpoint. It's not really based on eyeballs. It's more based on the behaviors and the audience you're trying to get in front of. So publishers do set the price point. That does change all the time. So like I said before, that's why there's that big range of a $30 to $100 CPM. But we can buy it two different ways, essentially. Programmatically, so we're just targeting a rate in real time, and then in that way we're targeting more broad. Or we can set up what's called PNP deals, or a publisher to publisher deal, where then we're higher up on the waterfall and we kind of lock in a specific rate with that publisher.
What is waterfall? You introduced waterfall just now. What does that mean?
Yeah, so when we do a PNP deal, like it's basically a direct buy is going to be at the top, and then a PNP deal would be the second, and then programmatic would be third. So all these channels are obviously selling a lot of ad space, right? Well, first they want to target the direct, because that's where they make the most money, and then they open it up to the PNP and then programmatic.
Yep. So it's getting bumped. It's whether or not you have rank and prayer. Okay, good. All right, very good. And then how do you compare cost per thousand, cost per, how do you compare some of these metrics? How do you know what's a good buy? How do you know what's a good value? How do you understand what's right for you?
I mean, one manual approach to it is you could just go ahead and call some of these networks themselves and see what it takes to get on, right? So like a lot of news channels, it can be upwards to a $30 to $50 CPM, Whereas us in real time, we can get that from a $10 to a $20 CPM. So there's value, and ad placement might not be as great, but there's also
Mhm.
measurements that you can make sure you're targeting above the fold, which is
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So I got another question to get to about YouTube, but before I do that, let's say I load a website that has video playing, maybe a news site or ESPN or something like that, and I'm scrolling, right? But I don't actually scroll so that something is completely visible. There are times there are videos that are like, the top 1/8 of the video kind of shows, and maybe it starts to play or not. I don't know. There's a trigger, but do I pay for that?
Yeah, so you do, but there's also you can also buy from a viewability percentage standpoint too. So that's called buying viewability impressions, and that's when you see 50% or more of the ad. You can actually even
Okay.
target it more. So when we're very keen on 70% or higher viewable impressions,
Okay.
that's a good metric to really look at.
Okay. And I again, I'm supposing that the more specific you get, the more niche you drill down, the more parameters you're putting on, there's a little bit more premium to the cost that you're buying, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So Ryan writes in, on YouTube, you see a lot of short 10-second or less video ads that you can't skip through. Are you seeing those very short burst ads on other CTV channels like Hulu and etc.? And are they generally effective?
Not so much yet for CTV. I know Hulu specifically, they'll have 3-minute time slots that are showing multiple ads, but usually they stick to that 15 to 30-second model. YouTube specifically, that's more of it's video, not necessarily connected TV. So they're non-skippable is becoming more and more popular. And I think as time goes on with the TikToks out there and the short videos, I think these 5 to 10 second quick hitter ads are going to become more and more popular.
And are you able to get into things like TikTok yet? Is that part of the platform at this point, or is that still content creator only?
TikTok is more of you have to kind of go direct to them.
Okay, because I
So
need that. We went back to Spencer and brushing his teeth at 8:30. It only works if I can get into TikTok. So if I could lay over that and say, put TikTok
yeah.
down, it's time to brush your teeth.
Mhm.
Told you for the thousandth time. So good. I think we have a Spencer campaign coming up soon. I don't know if you're reading that in the tea leaves or not. So well, good. Listen, I'm gonna ask if there's any other questions here. Please shoot them in. This has been wildly informative, and I really appreciate it. The level of depth here is great. And again, I'm recording it. And I'll put it over on the practical pitch. But I think you've been truly helpful to some people that have been looking at this and wondering, one, what is it? What does it mean? How do I measure it? And perhaps are a little bit more comfortable now in looking at it a different way. And getting, so how do people find you specifically? Give me the deets on the company, the information. If they want more about what you do specifically, how do they find you?
Yeah, our company is ExactDrive. We're located in Milwaukee and Minneapolis. Scott at ExactDrive is my personal email. But yeah, we do media buying across all forms. So anything you're looking to do online, we can certainly help you out or jump on a phone call and talk strategy.
And that's exactdrive.com if I want to look for you online.
Yep.
Yep. And you work with agencies like ours as well as direct. So what would you recommend if there's a business that's looking to do this? Like I said, you don't do creative and whatnot. So what do you recommend to people? Should they come straight to you? Should they go through an agency like ours? What's the demarcation line for that decision?
Yeah, so I mean, we do have one small creative team that can help with basic stuff, but we do know people within the industry, so we can definitely guide you in the right direction to have someone help you for any creative needs.
Okay. So is it best to talk to you first to figure out what we're doing before we do creative, or is it best to come to you with a creative plan and you figure out how to use it best?
I would say come to us first to talk about it before making it creative.
All right, Scott. Appreciate it very much. Scott Bagguley with Exact Drive in Wisconsin on practical advice to streaming devices and services. Appreciate it very much.